Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Amanda Coventry-Barrage, and I'm DWDC's program coordinator. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Kelsey Goforth, who is our director of programs, and of course by Melissa Muller, our program specialist. Today, I'm speaking to you from the traditional territory of many nations, including the Wendat, Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas of the Credit, located in Toronto and covered by Treaty 13. I want to acknowledge the legacy of colonialism and the impact it has had on all areas of life for Indigenous peoples, including in healthcare. As part of DWDC's adherence to the values of inclusion and people-centeredness, we're committing to working towards recognizing, respecting, and addressing the distinct health needs of Métis, Inuit, First Nations, and Indigenous peoples related to end-of-life and medical assistance in dying. We will continue to work and listen and amplify the voices of Indigenous communities in the discussions of end-of-life care and choice. Today's session is the third in our focused forum series. We will be meeting again, of course, on Thursday, April 28th, where we will be talking about systemic racism and healthcare with a nurse practitioner, Parveen Sangha. So for those who are interested, we will be putting a link to register in the chat. And of course, before I welcome today's presenter, we'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. We want to make sure that everyone on the call today is muted and your video cameras are off. We've received many messages in advance of the webinar today, and we want to extend our thanks to our engaged audience for such thoughtful questions, and we've made sure to include and combine as many as possible for today's session. And if you have any outstanding questions following the webinar or questions that are quite personal in nature, we want to ask you to please contact us at support@dyingwithdignity.ca, and we will follow up with you individually, of course. We will also be sending a post-webinar survey that will pop up on your screen after the webinar. It's going to give you the opportunity to share your feedback. And of course, this session is being recorded and will be approximately 60 to 75 minutes long. All right, now we're going to welcome today's speaker, Heather Cooke. Heather is the mother of Aaron. Heather's relationship with her son was always her passion. Aaron was not just her child, he became her best friend. Her life was full of her work, her grandchildren, travel with her husband, and much joy, until Aaron was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer on February 28th of 2019. In speaking about the powerful and very personal story of Aaron's end of life, Heather is longing to bring the fear of untimely death and the grieving process more fully into the light. Thank you for being with us today, Heather. I'm going to turn it now over to Kelsey to get us started with our conversation with Heather.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amanda, for the introduction, and of course to Heather for being with us this afternoon. So Heather, to get us started, Amanda introduced a little bit about your experience and your relationship with Aaron, but can you tell us a little bit more about Aaron and who he was as a person?
Thank you, Kelsey. That's actually a very loaded question for me. I could talk about Aaron forever and a day and always. I always could, and I probably always will. I just want to say to the audience that I may get a bit choked up as we start this, firstly, because I'm extremely honored and humbled to be here today. And also because I recognize that there are a lot of people out there. And although I can't see them, I know they're there. And I want so much to be able to speak words of encouragement and support and truth around our experience. So I'm going to try to get myself under control and answer the first question. So can you tell us a bit more about Aaron? Yes, I certainly can. Aaron was and is my only son, my only child. He was born June 27th, 1978. I was a young mother. I was 23 when Aaron was born, and I always joked with him and everyone else that would listen about how I grew up with Aaron. That's sort of how I felt. I was not a natural mother initially. I was frightened. I was anxious. I wasn't sure this is what I wanted to do. he was extremely colicky for the first 4 months, and it was hell. I have no other way of describing it. He knew that, I knew that. But when the colic stopped and the lights went on, it was just the most incredible, wonderful person that developed. And I say this so honestly. He was just the best of the best as a child. He was confident and sure of himself from the get-go. He was strong-willed. He was intelligent. He was inquisitive. He was extremely introverted. He was so comfortable in his own place and space. And growing up, from the time he could talk, this is just the truth. He literally would tell me and his father he didn't want a sibling. And whenever that would come up in some fashion, our friends were having more babies or whatever, Aaron would always make it very clear, I don't want a sibling. So a bit odd, one might think, but we were really quite okay with just Aaron. He filled our life, he filled our home. He was really special. He was loyal beyond as a child. I'm going to give you a situation that happened. He was not a fighter. He was not someone who would ever embark in assertive, aggressive behavior. But one time when he was in public school, probably around grade 6 or 7, I got a call from the principal's office, and I was at work, and the call was, Aaron's been in a fight, and we need you to come to the, come to the school and pick him up. And I was just like floored, because that just seemed so out of character. And when I got to the school and picked him up, the story unfolded that there had been someone bullying a child who was picked on frequently at school, and this was often happening, and Aaron couldn't take it any longer. And Aaron literally went up to the person who was bullying this other child and addressed it. And the two got into a physical fight, and Aaron didn't back away. So that's who he was. The other thing about Aaron I want to talk about just a little bit, if I can, is that when he was just before he turned 9, Aaron had a situation where he was bruising, and I was concerned about this because the bruises weren't hurting him, and I took him into the doctor, and that was our first encounter with almost losing him. He had developed a rare blood disorder. It's called ITP. Do not ask me the long term, but what was happening is his platelets were being knocked off by his spleen, and he spent from May until the end of August in hospital. Initially, we thought he had leukemia, and I went through my first period of complete sense of everything out of control, and I can't do this. And I can remember those days where I would cry all the way to the hospital, and I would stay with him, and when I would get out for my breaks, I would just keep sobbing because I couldn't stop until we were able to diagnose it. And then we went through a whole summer of attempts at treatments, and the final treatment that worked was the surgeon had to remove spleen. And during that period of time, Aaron wrote a story, and it was a story about, I just about died this summer. And it was very, reflecting back, one could say, do we know? No, of course we don't. But he had a touch with a death, and it influenced him in many, many ways, because he did recover, and he was a healthy 9-year-old. He had a few physical, so for example, they had treated him with steroids, and so Aaron's weight changed at that point in time, and he always struggled with weight. And it was something that, from a physical perspective, he was not so comfortable with himself, but from every other perspective, he was just a healthy 9-year-old that got on with his life. However, two things. One, from that moment forward, he was terrified of hospitals, terrified of them. And from that moment forward, he had a different perspective on life, and to be ill and to be well again. And I believe strongly now that it was what triggered, the inner courage had already been triggered when he was 9, and it needed to be triggered again when he hit 40. So that's Aaron as a child. Do you want more, or shall I talk a little bit more about that?
I think that what you've shared, it's incredible to get to know Aaron a little bit through your stories and hear about him as a child and like you said, how that experience as a 9-year-old going through, he got through it and that's wonderful, but a very traumatic, healthcare experience for a young kid, how that maybe ties into his choices down the road. I think maybe with the next question, if you could tell us more about Aaron. I think we're all curious to hear more about such a fantastic person, and maybe tie in what your relationship with Aaron was like as well.
Sure. Okay. So I have a single word for my relationship with Aaron that I throw out every time I'm asked a question. It was absolutely 100% authentic. That is the word I would always use. It was not perfect. It was certainly the best of the best, but it was authentic. It was just so real. He grew up an only child. We grew up in a community where his father, my ex-husband, and I lived. It was a tight community. It was a small town. His father traveled a lot and was away a lot. So Aaron and I were together a lot. The community was far right, fundamental, evangelical. And Aaron, for the first 9 years of his life, was part of that community. Aaron's father and I, our marriage eventually broke down when Aaron was 18 because I could not do that world anymore. Just a little bit of history. Aaron's grandfather was an evangelical minister and had huge impact, influence in all of our lives. And as I grew into adulthood and as I was shifting and changing and growing, I could not continue to be part of that community. And that really had an incredible impact on how I was not able to continue to stay there. And his father and I were not able to continue our marriage. Our marriage broke down when Aaron headed to first year university. And that was a period of time for 4 years that was very difficult for all of us. Aaron had a wonderful childhood. We did a lot of traveling. We had good life. We had good life. And there was this closeness, but it wasn't like, as Aaron would say, it wasn't like, he was not a mother's boy. I would not describe him that way. He had friendships that stayed with him and until he died. He had friends that started when he was in kindergarten and they continued on. He, when our marriage broke down and he was 18, his father did move away to Toronto and I stayed in the Kingston area with Aaron. So from the time he was 18 until we lost him, he and I lived in the same city. We went through incredible shifts and change and some trauma, but we always communicated. And that was such an important thing in our relationship. We never walked away from conflict. We didn't go looking for it. We didn't, Aaron didn't, pursue it, but it was just, as he developed, the door was always open between the two of us about talking through things. And so he came into Kingston, he went to university, he had wonderful years at university. He partied with the best of them, but he was always he was just always, the word I'm looking for, he was responsible. He was always responsible. So I never worried about him as a mother. Like, he could be out, he would often show up. We were living separately at that point in time, and he would often show up at my apartment because I was single, and he would show up in my apartment only on the nights when he was extremely intoxicated, and he'd usually have 2 or 3 friends with him, but they were responsible. Those 4 years were tough years for Aaron and tough years for me. I'll give an example. I tried to stay as close as I could to him, but giving him his freedom to grow into adulthood, recognizing that he was going through his own pain. There was a period of time where he wasn't talking to me, and yet I would still call him up and say, can I pick you up? Can we go out to dinner? Or can I pick you up? Can I bring you groceries? Or, some way of being in his world. And one night in particular, I picked him up. We went out. We had dinner. I tried to engage him in conversation. I was getting, 1-syllable answers to everything. And I had been in some therapy myself, just working through everything. And we drove home, and he went to get out of the car. And I said, Aaron, could you answer this question for me? If you don't want to talk to me, and if you don't want to connect with me right now, why in the world are you still accepting my offers to go out to dinner and coming out and not speaking and just, then getting out of the car and leaving? And he turned around and he had this wonderful, wonderful grin. It was a wonderful smile. And he said, because I'm hungry, Mom. And he chuckled and he left. And that was Aaron. He was just real. He was that opened a door, and we started to talk more fully about a lot of things, and that door never closed. Aaron and I, from that moment forward, just always talked through things. And even if we didn't like the answers we were giving each other, we didn't let situations go. So as he grew into manhood, and I moved into another relationship with my husband, who was Aaron's stepfather, and his father also moved into another relationship, and he could see that we were both better for it. He slowly began to accept that, but on his terms. And his terms, from in those early days, from when he began to develop relationships himself, and then when he met Cynthia, and when that relationship became solid and strong, and then the children came along, we always were family on Aaron's terms. And Aaron's terms were, we're family. This may have happened, but you are my mother, and Dad is my father, and I accept Bill as your partner and Nancy as Dad's partner. We are going to always be family together. So when there are birthdays, you are all invited. Get over it. When there's any occasion that matters to me, you will both be brought into the loop. Get over it if you don't like it. You will always be my mom. I only have one mom. You will always be my dad. I only have one dad. But these children, as they came along, are your grandchildren. And so he drove that. And what that did for us was help us all to develop healthy relationships beyond. And I kudos to each and every one of us, because we could have slammed those doors and said no. But if any of us had done that, look what we would have missed. And we had the forthrightness not to do that. It was driven by Aaron. And so that explains a little bit. Career, do you want me to keep going or?
I think just in the interest of time, and I think we have a lot of Aaron's story to get through. We might move ahead with some additional questions, but I think, you know, what you've shared, there's so many lessons, just life lessons that Aaron taught you and your family, and I think a lot of us can, you know, take those away as well. Just trying to, in our own families, dealing with conflict or different family structures and communicating. And I think it's so difficult to have that open communication sometimes. And just hearing how Aaron sort of kept that at the center of everything in your family, it's certainly something to keep in mind for all of us. So thank you for that. So Aaron, just fast forwarding a little bit to later in Aaron's life, correct me if I'm wrong, it was in his early 40s that he was diagnosed with cancer, is that right? And
Yes.
can you share with us what happened after he received that diagnosis?
Yes. So Aaron was 40 when he was diagnosed. Just back up a little bit, give you a little bit of history. Aaron was working at Queen's and he was the sustainability manager here at Queen's. So it was a good job for him, environmental issues, and he had been in it for many years and he was ready to move on. He had done his time and he had more to offer and he was wanting to grow. And he had just finished his master's in environmental issues, and he graduated in 2018, and that had been an incredibly busy year for him. And having gone back to school and working full time and 2 little boys and his partner wife Cynthia, his life was incredibly busy. It was crazy busy. And he was struggling in the position, and he had finished and he realized he needed to go somewhere else. And he was just on the cusp, literally on the cusp of being offered a job. It would have been with the federal government. It would have been in environmental issues. It would have been in research. And he had had a couple of other job offers, and the family was on the move. They were just there, 40 years old. He had symptoms. The only symptoms that were picked up at all was he was a little tired, more so than usual. He was extremely stressed, and he was cold more than he should have been. That was it. Okay. So in November 2018, he had been for a second interview. The job door was open and he decided he needed to go for a physical. He went to our family doctor, who had birthed him, literally, so his family doctor we knew forever and a day and always, and asked for a physical, and everything seemed to be okay, except that his iron levels were low when the doctor did blood work. And we've had many conversations about this. Most physicians would not have redone those blood tests because the levels were so insignificantly low that most doctors would have ignored it. But our doctor decided to run those tests again. They were run in December, and the iron levels were even a little lower. And the white blood cell count wasn't right. Our doctor thought he had an internal bleed, thought it could possibly have been an ulcer, and said, I want to book you for a colonoscopy, endoscopy, upper. And so that was the first glimpse we had something might not be 100% right. It took until February the 28th to get in for that colonoscopy. In hindsight, it is just hindsight. Would it have made a difference if it had been a month earlier? Here we are. So on February 28th, a day we will never forget, 2019, Aaron and Cynthia headed off for the colonoscopy, and I had the boys pick them up, and I don't know, something was off that day. And we took the kids out and took them to school. And I was heading into work and the call came, and it was Aaron. And he said, Mom, I need you to be calm. But he said, I don't have great news. And before he began to explain it to me, he said, so I also need to know that they took Cynthia and me to the grieving room. And he kind of chuckled. And he said, you never want to go to the grieving room. And he said, here's the problem. They found a large mass of her colon. However, Mom, we're all going to stay calm and we're going to explore further. But if this is just an upper mass, if it's a mass, upper colon, you know, there's surgery. And that was the beginning. 2019 was our year of hope for Aaron. What happened is that they immediately started to book CAT scans and ultrasounds and everything to ensure that that's all there was. And very quickly, actually, it was within a week and a half, they discovered that the cancer was spread to his lymph nodes, and there were spots on his liver. And when that was determined, that was early March. And we were told stage 3. As they explored a little bit further, within another week, we were told that this could be a little more extensive than we thought. So we're talking 3-4. The day he called me to tell me it was stage 3-4, I was walking to work, and I'll never forget that day. And I said, Aaron, the story is getting a little bit darker every time you talk or every time you get another test. And he said, yeah. And I said, okay, what do you need from me? And Aaron had already thought through what he needed from me. And I lived with this mantra forever. He said, Mom, here's what I need. I need you to stay strong. I need you to stay well. And here's the one that really threw me. I need you not to hover. My only son, the love of my life, and I am not supposed to hover. But I got it, and I get it, and I will forever get it and be so grateful that he'd already started to think through what he needed from us, right? So 2019, Aaron had first surgery middle of April, and they went in and they removed about a third to nearly a half of his upper colon, but he did not need a coloscopy bag, thank God for him. That would have been devastating. And they also attempted to reroute some blood flow to another part of his liver, because what we discovered as we started to look at the liver was that in actual fact, Aaron had a deformed liver, and where the cancer was growing was on the healthy side. There were complications from that. And although the first surgery in April was successful as best could be, and the procedure, it was horribly difficult for him. And in early May, he developed his first blood clot, and that was not diagnosed properly. And he and Cynthia went into urgent care twice, got nowhere. And it was the third time in, he called me and said, Mom, will you come with me? Cynthia's got to stay home with the kids. And I said, if I come with you, we're not leaving the hospital till you've had an ultrasound. And he said, I'm giving you permission to do that. And when they did the ultrasound, they discovered a blood clot. He was close to dying. That was early May, but they managed to get it dissolved. His father stepped in at that point in time, and we were both there helping him through that. We all got through that, but that was the beginning of the blood clots and internal bleeds for him. He then had his next surgery in mid-July, and that was to remove as many spots off the liver as they possibly could remove, with the hope that they would take everything that they could. They did some fusion, and they did some removal, and the surgeon came out quite encouraged. And then Aaron headed into chemo. Chemo started in September. One thing I want to mention that I am just beyond honored about and so grateful for. Cynthia, Aaron's wife, who is also a registered nurse, by the way, which she's phenomenal. She worked a lot of her career in ICU and Emerge, so she's that kind of person. And she's phenomenally wonderful in crisis. She and Aaron agreed that I would do the night shift with Aaron, and she would do the day shift so she could be home with the boys. And her parents came, and we were all there, and his father and stepmother, and of course my husband, his stepdad. We were all surrounding him during this period of time. But I got to do every single night in the hospital with Aaron, every single one, which is just the most incredible thing in the world, because during those many nights that he was in hospital, there I slept on this cot or in a chair. And he was able to let me help him. So those nights when he couldn't sleep because he was in so much pain, or he needed his back rubbed, or he just needed to be a son to his mother, we were able to do that. Every single one of those nights was just heaven and hell at the same time, right? We go through chemo. We think 13 treatments. Again, we shared, I would go for one chemo treatment, Cynthia would go for another, his father would go through for another. This was happening all the way through the fall. And they carried on into early January. We had some housekeeping to do because we realized how serious Aaron's condition was. And we had a cottage that we had to sell because of financial reasons and because Cynthia and Aaron needed some financial support. There was a lot of that going on. We all lived in hope. All through 2019, we lived in hope. From the moment he was diagnosed, we stayed well. We didn't hover. We stayed strong. All of our family did that together. And again, Aaron was at the center. The focus was on Aaron and the boys and Cynthia. But it was, I sort of describe it as, I'm showing my age here, but it was like, it's like wagons and horses. And I'm thinking of, the Western, how you surround, you surround what's important, which was Aaron and health and family. And we did that as a family, and we were always there and we were always together. And even though we all came at this from different emotional perspectives, our focus stayed where it needed to be, which is on Aaron and health and staying with us. So that was 2019. I gotta stop there.
Yeah, it just kind of, it ties in so well to what you were saying before about how Aaron really planted those seeds of family, and we're getting through things, and it doesn't matter what's happened in the past, we're a unit and we're supporting each other. And it seems like all of that did kind of come together in this way. And you were able to all be with him during this very difficult time. So can you share a little bit about what happened when Aaron reached the decision to have MAID? Kind of what led up to that, and how was that decision made, and how did you and your family react to that news that he was looking to move forward with that?
Yes, I certainly can. So there are so many stories, and I'm trying to focus on the ones that will matter to people. During this period of time, Aaron, one of his many friends, and he had a few, but one who was very close to him, 2 weeks before Aaron was diagnosed with stage 3/4 colon cancer, his friend was. And his name was Darren. And Darren had a very different situation than Aaron, incredibly different, did not have family support, had 3 children, a wife had left him. I mean, was the sole supporter of a family. His mother was dying. It was horrific. And in typical Aaron fashion, Aaron was there for Darren. He just was. Because Aaron looked at his situation and said, hey, look what I've got here, right? And Darren, we're both going to get through this, but look at all the support I have. And he would reach out to Darren, and he would talk to Darren, and they would end up in hospital together. And unfortunately, Darren died in July of 2019. So Aaron was diagnosed February 28th. Darren had been diagnosed 2 weeks before that, and Darren only made it to July. 2 things around that event. One, Aaron went to his funeral. Aaron was just heading into his 3rd surgery, and Aaron recognized how swiftly life could be taken away. And he was terrified. You don't go through this without being terrified. But he put his fear behind him, and he said, my friend Darren died, and we are going to be there. And Cynthia couldn't go, and totally understand why not. She had a sense of, but Aaron went, and he came to my home afterward, and he talked to me about it and how good it was to have been there and how sorrowful he was. And he said something to me which again has stayed with me forever, and that was, Mom, I'm not Darren. That's not my story. I am so sorrowful for him, but that is not my story, and I needed to be there. right around that time, and it was just prior to this happening. He and I had gone out to lunch, so I'm thinking it was probably late June, okay? And we came back to our place. We used to have these mother-son lunches quite frequently. And he came back to my place and he said, there's something I need to talk to you about, and I do not want you to overreact, which was always Aaron's thing. Okay, Aaron, I won't overreact. What do you want to talk to me about? And he said, we're living in hope, because we talked a lot about that. And he said, you know, there is a good chance that if everything goes well for me, I might buy 5 years, because that's how we were thinking, right? We weren't being unrealistic, but we weren't, you know, we were saying if we could buy 5 years, who knows what could happen in 5 years. So that's where we all were at that point. And he said, but Mom, here's the thing. I'm giving this a lot of thought, and I need something from you. And I'm so honored. I'm so honored to know that I was the first person he talked to about MAID. And he said, I don't know a lot about MAID. He said, I'm sure you don't. But he said, I've started to investigate assisted dying if I get there. So, you know, I don't want to get there. But if I get there, I'm starting to investigate it. And there's something I need from you. I need you to know, firstly, why I'm doing it. If I get there, I would be doing it because I cannot bear to have my sons watch me die slowly in front of them. I cannot do that to them. I cannot watch them watch my body, my mind deteriorate in front of them. And he said, if I'm there, there is no hope. And so I need to control how I go out. And he said, I am just literally sitting there listening. And he said, here's what I need from you. I don't yet know what the legal implications are. I don't know if, you know, if I'm unconscious, or so we started to talk a little bit about what could happen. And he said, I don't know if I would be able to trigger it, the actual process, before, you know, beforehand. I just don't know. So here's what I'm asking of you, Mom. I'm asking that you would be my advocate. Of course, I will be talking to Cynthia about this, but I need you on board. And I swallowed a couple of times, and I knew there was only one answer out there. There can't be two. This wasn't my decision. This wasn't my time. This wasn't my life. This was my son trusting me enough to support what he needed to do. I never looked back from that moment. And that we are not a family that was out there, hey, hey, let's support assisted dying. Hey, hey, isn't this a good thing? It wasn't on our radar. It was nowhere on our radar. But from the moment he talked to me about it, I just knew if we got there, and I didn't want to, and I couldn't even imagine it at that point in time, I had to be there for him. And so that was my reaction. Literally, that was my reaction. And I don't want this to sound like, oh, look at you, aren't you great? It's not about that. This was a request that was so true to what Aaron required. It was like him asking me for water if we were in a desert and there wasn't any there. I would have no other reaction but to have supported it. That was my first inclination. We put it on the back shelf and we moved on.
Thank you, Heather, for sharing that. And, you know, I can't imagine the strength that comes in that moment to say, you know, I'm going to support you through whatever it is, knowing that it's not going to be easy and it's going to be very painful to say goodbye, but still saying, you know, it's your wish and I'm going to be there for you through whatever. It's incredibly moving. And I think our audience would agree that we're so grateful to hear exactly what that was like for you. So from the time, you know, that was a discussion, and you mentioned we're just going to kind of park it for now. We've had the talk and we'll see what happens. So then Aaron would have had to go through the process with the assessments and the clinicians. So once he was, you know, approved for MAID, was there a lot of time between that approval and when he decided to move forward? And if so, you know, how did you spend that time together?
So we did park it. And we went back to living in hope and more surgeries and chemo and conversation with his father for sure. And he clearly was having conversation with Cynthia after he talked to me. It never came up again between him and me until April the 20th, 2020. So Aaron finished chemo. We were all processing, oh my God, Aaron isn't going to be with us until he's 90. He's not going to be sitting beside my deathbed. I'm sure we all started to, I in particular, and I can only speak to myself, started to think about what if, but didn't have those conversations with Aaron unless he raised it. If he raised it, we'd talk about it, but I didn't push it. So we, as a family, made Bill and I, my husband and I, wanted to do something for Aaron and Cynthia and the boys after his chemo was done. And we as a family booked a trip. And we gave it to them and we said, where do you want to go, guys? And they wanted to go to Disneyland, which of course is so typical because we have these little boys and, you know, so we booked a trip. And Aaron went back to feeling pretty wonderful after chemo. Chemo was hard. It was, you know, it was all the things it is. It kills you as it tries to save you. We all know it does that. And yet we all lean into it because it's what we have. But he was healthy again in January. And actually my husband and I took off on a brief vacation. He picked us up at the airport. This was when COVID-19 was just out there. And I still remember him coming to the airport, it's midnight, and he picks us up and he's grinning and he says, so, because he had just had his last chemo treatment a week before that. And he says, so, he says, I'm healthy, but I'm a little worried you might have the virus. So no kissing, no hugging. But he was in great space and he was healthy. And so we took this trip and we went and we had 11 days, and Aaron and Cynthia drove down and we flew with boys, and so they had their window of time going and coming back, and we had the kids and my brother and so Aaron's uncle and my sister-in-law joined us, and we had 11 days of just honest to God, you know, it was spectacular. And it was so poignant because again, it's family and you're together and you're in a big house and you're doing Disneyland and you're out every day for 10, 11, 12 hours and the kids might get upset. And we were all worried a little bit about COVID by that point in time. But it was just, I don't want to say it because it's so cliche, but it was magical. I'm sorry, but the Magic Kingdom was magical. And that period was phenomenal. Aaron always drove. We drove together in a van. We'd rented a van and he drove every single day. And he went on every frightening ride you can imagine. And, you know, you see the signs, you know, if you had recent surgery, if you had a heart attack, if you had whatever. And my brother, his uncle, is crazy like him, and they enjoyed every second of it. And it was just heaven. And we arrived home, us with the boys a day and a half early. And it was March the 8th. And on March the 9th, the world shut down. And we went into COVID, okay? Aaron was due for his CAT scan, his first CAT scan in early April. And we talked about that first CAT scan. And he was pretty sure it was going to be okay. And we talked about when the CAT scan wasn't okay. But he was not worried about that one. And we were all in lockdown and we were seeing the kids by going to the house and waving at them and, you know, dropping food on the porch. And he had to go to the CAT scan alone. That was the beginning of everything having to be alone because you couldn't take anybody with you because of COVID. And Oliver, our oldest grandson, his oldest son, was turning 11 on April 20th. And we were doing a party outside. And when we were doing this party outside, we were taking stuff and I had called just to wish Oliver happy birthday. And, you know, he said, oh, that's great, Grandma, and we're looking forward to seeing you. But Daddy had to go out to the hospital this morning, which was unexpected. And I said, really? Why is that, Oliver? He goes, oh, don't worry, there's nothing going on. He just had to give a little bit more blood. And we hung up and I knew I knew he'd had a call. And I said, could you have Daddy give me a call when he gets in? And he did. And he said, he was up in the room, he had the door closed, and he was crying. And he said, Mom, I have bad news. And he said, now I need you to keep it together. My CAT scan has shown that the cancer's back, and it's back in the liver, and it's on the lungs, and it's really not good. But here's what we're going to do today. This is Oliver's birthday. And we are not going to spoil Oliver's birthday by sharing this news today. Oliver is not going to know that on his birthday, his daddy got this news. So we're all going to put on our smiley faces and we're going to do a party outside and we're going to keep it together. And if anybody out there has looked at has read the blog that I posted around Aaron's death and that weekend, there's a picture. It's the one of Aaron sitting on the porch with Oliver, his oldest, the dark-haired with the glasses. That was Oliver's birthday. That was the day we found out Aaron was terminal. That was the beginning of processing. That was the beginning of talking to MAID again. When we kept it together, we celebrated Oliver's birthday, and the next day, Aaron called me, and they had shared the news with the boys. And from the moment they shared the news with the boys until Aaron died September 13th, the foursome became a unit. The boys were always fully apprised, not in a fearful way, not in a, overly emotional way. Obviously there was emotion, but they were always told the truth about their father's condition. It was a decision Aaron and Cynthia made together, and they made it so courageously, and they handled that situation and the communication with the children in a way that is just phenomenal. The boys were part of the decision that Daddy, if he wasn't going to make, we were going to try again, we were going to try chemo again, we were going to do everything we could, but Daddy's time really was limited now. And Daddy was going to trigger something called assisted dying. And from that moment on, the boys were part of the process of knowing that. Aaron didn't begin to sign off on the formal papers until July 16th. And the reason it happened then was chemo started. We all began to go through the shift and the change of what this means. But it wasn't until July 16th that he had another serious episode and ended up in ICU. And again, I will not go into the details because I would be here for 5 hours. But when he had to go back into ICU, he was having internal bleeding. It was complicated. The only thing, so chemo was really hard on him. It just kicked him like you wouldn't believe. They had to cut the dosage, and then he started to have the blood clots and then the internal bleeds. One followed the other. And in ICU at that point in time, we had to call the ambulance. He could not walk. He had to leave the home on a stretcher, waving goodbye to his kids as we all bravely stood there. And Cynthia, because she was a registered nurse, and only because she was a registered nurse and still had a key to the hospital, was able to slip in the back door to be with him during that period of time. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been because of COVID. We stayed home with the boys. Aaron checked himself in. He was close to dying. They needed to do blood transfusion, and they wanted to go in and do more exploratory procedures. And Aaron said, if you go in and you do exploratory procedures, can you assure me that you will find it and you will fix it? And nobody could give him that assurance. And he said, no, not going there. I've had enough of this. You aren't, and it was complicated, but it was just July 16th, as he said, we are going to need to face the fact that I have a short window of time and I need to start the legal process with MAID. He checked himself out of ICU 2.5 days later. He shouldn't have, but he needed to come home. And there wasn't any more that they could do for him if he wasn't willing to let them go in. So they gave him transfusion. He was then considered palliative. He was also still encouraged to continue to try some chemo. And ultimately he did. He wasn't sure he was going to at first, but ultimately he did. But he was on the path to, this is how it will unfold for me. And so that was the beginning. Again, him coming home, the need to honor what he needed, the need to embrace that we were here, the need to stay strong for the children, the need to hold our emotions in. Perfect. But it was also what was necessary. And so there we were, July 16th. That's when it began with assisted dying.
Thank you, Heather. And I think our audience can agree. Your story, it's so powerful. I'm feeling a lot as you tell this story, and I'm sure others are as well. And before we get into the next question, which I can only imagine is going to be very difficult to share with everyone, I just wanted to read out a comment that came through that I thought was really beautiful. This person says, "You are an incredible mother. Thank you so much for sharing this heart-wrenching story." And I want to echo that. Just the strength that you showed and your family showed through this experience, and all that you were able to do for Aaron. It really is beautiful. So Heather, if you could tell us a little bit about, from Aaron's experience with MAID, what stands out to you about what you experienced? And of course, only what you're comfortable talking about, of course, but anything that you wanted to share with the group.
Yes. Sorry, I now have a red nose and I need a drink of water. Okay. Aaron had the most phenomenally wonderful experience with me. I know that is not the case for everyone. I know that MAID is absolutely 100% not for everyone. But in all of the horror of what Aaron had to live through and find the strength to do, it was the connection to the phenomenal doctor whose name I cannot mention online, who happened to be the one that picked up Aaron's case, that allowed us as a family to experience good death, allowed Aaron as a young man having to die before his time with no rhyme nor reason to find a companion who he could talk to, who got it. Okay. I subsequently have been honored to have stayed in touch with this doctor, which for me has been such a blessing, because there are two sides to these stories. It's not just the story of we as the family going through this and Aaron leaving us, but it's the trauma that those that are dedicated to saving life as your profession, and then recognizing that all life ends and being willing to pick up this other piece and say, and when life is ending, we also need to support that. But you don't do that. It's a calling. I have another word for it. I come out of a family of ministers, and my father always said, you don't go into the ministry unless you have a calling. Well, you do not do this as a doctor unless you have a calling. I have the privilege of having worked in healthcare and with physicians. And there are, you know, like any other profession, there are lots of good ones, there are lots of bad ones, but you do not do this unless you're called to do it, because it's really a tough emotional journey. But this individual that came to Aaron got it, and they developed a connection. And I'll never forget Aaron saying to me, after he had had his first session, there was hope back in his voice. And he said, Mom, everything else that has gone wrong, all the anger we carry toward the healthcare system and what's happening and what's happened to me, and I have finally found someone who gets it. Who would have thought it would be in the assisted dying doctor? But it was. Okay. So Aaron went through the steps of you have to have witnesses to sign off, and it can't be family members. We would have done it. We couldn't. So he went to his two best friends. And they came to the house. I happened to be there at the time, just sobbing. Like, these are 42-year-old, 41-year-old guys who adore each other, and they're signing off on their best friend's death because they needed to, because he needed it. And then this doctor who was there for Aaron, they had their 2 sessions, and I would take the boys out of the house and he would have the sessions, and he was at peace with it. This was happening in early August. So I wasn't part and parcel to the person at that point in time. I wasn't needing to sign off. I was supporting Aaron and Cynthia, taking all the steps forward, looking after the children, and also beginning to have some conversation with Aaron's father about it as well. Because I was so close to the situation, and because he lived away, he was going through so many other emotions, as you can only imagine, because he was coming in and only seeing Aaron. He'd come as often as he could, and he wanted to. This was another piece that I'd like to talk a little bit about if I have time. When you're a parent and you're this close to your child, and then your child is leaving you, and it's happening so quickly. Some people would go into denial. Some people wouldn't be able to talk about it. Some people would, I mean, there's all different kinds of emotions and reactions because we're all humans and we come at things differently. But again, Aaron had this determination. We have to do this, and we have to do it well. And for me, as his mother, I had to let go. And you cannot imagine, well, yes, you can't. The hardest thing in the world I've ever had to do is let go of my son. And I had to start to let go of him before he died. Because if I didn't do that, I wasn't giving him the emotional room that he required to be there for his children and his life. So I was going through a lot of that myself, and I wasn't right there firsthand with MAID. But everything I now know for Aaron, it was exactly what he needed when he needed. Thank goodness for that.
Thank you, Heather, for sharing that with us. So after Aaron had his MAID procedure, can you tell us a little bit about how you dealt with the grief of that experience and what that looked like for you after he had MAID?
So I wanted, if I can, just back up a little bit and talk a little bit about grief before he died, because there is huge amount of grief process before you lose the person that I think is worth just talking a little bit about. The comments that I'm just the best mother, and I know I'm not. No, I'm not. But what I had, so, and I'm so grateful for, is we had love. We just had love, right? We had it in abundance. And we had strength because we had love, not because we are strong people. Okay. It's just sort of like, you know, if you got love, it's amazing what you can do, right? But I had to go through, and I know his father would have a different story and his step parents would have a different story, but I had to let him go. I had to start letting him go. And that was in August and then September. And I was angry. Oh my God, I was angry. I was angry at Aaron. I was angry at Aaron because I'd always been able to be there and fix things for him. And he was slowly needing me to step back and come in when he needed me and not be there. And I was having the worst time in the world with that. And I'd also had to go to, he's going to die. And my husband didn't want me to. He didn't want me to go there. And I didn't have any choice because I knew if I didn't process it emotionally and then come back from it, I couldn't do it, right? So I was going through that. And I just wanted to be with him 24/7 and I couldn't be. And I understood it intellectually why I couldn't be, but I couldn't emotionally deal with it. And so I was angry at my dying son. And I was talking to Bill, my husband, about it. And I was talking to anybody else that would listen to me about it because I'm a talker. And it was Bill who said, you need to go have that conversation with Aaron. You guys have always talked about everything. You need to go share that with Aaron. And so I called Aaron up and I said, hon, I have to come talk to you. And he goes, it's going to be a tough talk. And I said, yeah. And he knew. And so he was ready for me. He was in the backyard. And this is now early August. And it was just him and me, and the kids were playing in the background. Cynthia was away. I came in and I said, I'm angry at you. And he goes, I know. And I said, I don't know how to do this. And he said, I know, and neither do I. But Mom, I know you're going to understand this because we've always been true to each other. But I'm dying. And I have this much room. And in that room, I have to be with Oliver and Avery and Cynthia. And I have to be able to give them what I can while I can. I've got this window to put it all together. I haven't got room for you. I haven't got room for your emotional needs. I always have, and you have always had. And that's not fair. And that doesn't make any sense. And I'm supposed to be there for you when you're old. Not this way, but here we are. So I know you're mad and you have every right to be. And I know you're angry and you have every right to be. Nothing I can do about it. Nothing you can do about it. And we sat there and we cried together. And that didn't mean I wasn't still angry at him or hurt. But I understood it fully. Okay? Because he knew how to communicate that to me. I taught him a little bit of that. I had to accept it. I had panic attacks through July and August and September. And I called my doctor one day because I didn't know what to do with them, even though I knew that that's what they were. And I called him and I said, I'm having panic attacks and I don't know what to do. And he said, you know, you're sure it's not heart? You're sure it's not? I know, no, it's not. They're panic attacks. I just can't breathe. Something sitting on my chest. And he said, okay, Heather, there's only one thing I could do for you. I can give you a bit of medication. I was like, no, I don't do medication. And he's like, Heather, there's nothing else I can offer you. I can come in and we can do a physical, but I could suggest something to calm you down. And so here's what I did. And this is not for everybody. I said, okay, you write the prescription and I will possibly pick it up. And that's exactly what we did. And I did. And I put it on my top shelf at home. And every time I thought I couldn't get through it, I would look up at that shelf. I never took one of those pills. That's me. That is not for everybody. But it was my safety blanket. It was my, yeah. And yeah, so I wanted to give a grief begins before. So we were there. And it was It was horrific. And as I said to so many people, I don't wish it on my worst enemy. I don't wish it on Vladimir Putin. It's horrific, but it is life and death, and it does come to us all. So now, do you want me to talk about grief afterward?
Yeah, sure, Heather, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. So if you haven't read the blog, to the people listening, I would encourage you to do so, because we had the most phenomenal end of life weekend with Aaron. And it will haunt us forever. It will also be our greatest strength and comfort forever. And 4 months after Aaron passed away, it was swirling within us all. And I was fortunate enough to be able to take pen to paper and get it out onto paper. And for me, that was one of the greatest, one of the healing processes that I have actually leaned into now more than once, to be able to write, to be able to put it down. Having the story out there, it's such a relief, and yet it's also so honoring Aaron's legacy. He would want his story told, and I knew that. It poured out of me. I wrote it in January. He died September 13th. I wrote it in January. I wrote it within about 3-4 days. I couldn't quit writing. I would hand it to my husband. He would read it. He would cry. He'd say, keep writing. We just sobbed over it for days, but it's out there. So it is a beautiful end of life story, because it was a beautiful end of life. And it was all because Aaron died a good death. And I understand that now from some coursework I've done and getting some distance on it. A good death doesn't necessarily mean MAID, but for Aaron, it did mean MAID. And we were there, and we were able to take fear and put it over here, so that what flooded our time, our last weekend, was love and light and courage and hope and joy and sorrow. And again, we were able as a family to do this together. We weren't focused on Uncle Joe said, or Aunt Susie did, or we were focused on what we needed to be focused on, which was to allow Aaron to lead us to the end, and to leave us with, it's happening. I love you. I love you. It's okay. I'm okay. So there's a lot of that if you haven't read this story, I'd encourage you to do so. Afterwards, you go into shock. You go into all the things that have to be done mode. We were in the middle of pandemic still. It's horrible, but it's also, you function. You do it for all the right reasons. And Aaron had prepared everything. Aaron had prepared what words he wanted said, what people he wanted there, that he wanted to stay with us. So we all carry him around my neck, but he's in our homes. Cynthia has half his ashes. I have a quarter of his ashes. His father has the other quarter. We draw great comfort from that, because he's still with us, because he wasn't ready to go, and he wants to stay living with us. And that's such an honor to be able to have met that request for him. What types of feelings do you experience? It's just it's sorrow that is so deep and so painful that you really don't have words for it. You just don't. It's embedded in you. But always is pride. Like, I'm so proud, right? One of the hardest feelings that I've had to deal with is anger. If anybody that knows me knows I'm a bit emotive, and anger is a go-to. I think it's a go-to in grief because it helps to release. And I've had to do an incredible amount of self-reflection. I really truly have, about anger in particular, because we as a family never gave energy, never, as much as we possibly could do so, did not give energy to the why. Why Aaron? Why cancer? Why 42? Why leaving us? Why, right? We refused to, because there aren't any answers. And if to draw comfort to not go there, you come up with pat answers, so be it. For us, it was like, what a waste of energy. And we don't have a lot to give right now. And we're not going to have a lot to give. We're going to focus on his life, his legacy, his time, the blessings, all of that matters to us. But I have been angry. And I've been angry for all the right reasons and all the wrong reasons. And I've been angry at all the right people and all the wrong people. And I have allowed myself that because it's a coping mechanism. But what I've had to really recognize is that nobody can take this grief off of me. Nobody can. And I now carry it. If I say proudly, does that make sense? At first, I desperately wanted it to go away. I desperately wanted it to stop. I wanted the pain to stop. And I kept looking for, okay, if I do this, will it stop? If I do that, will it stop? If I just wait long enough, will it stop? If I, whatever. And it doesn't stop. And I started to live into it more fully. But it was wrong of me, and it is wrong of me, to be angry at people because they don't get it, okay? Because none of us get it. I don't get it. So everything I'm living, going through, grieving, journeying, I know because I have close friends and close acquaintances that are going through their own grief journey, and I can't get it because I'm not living it. And therefore, in this 19 months now that Aaron has been gone, has died, I'm slowly coming to terms with, it is not so-and-so's fault that they didn't call me. Or if I say I need help and a person doesn't respond, or if I say I need more attention and they don't get it, being angry at them, it's really not going to serve me any purpose. So I'm working through some of that still. And I'm trying really hard not to blame people for not getting it or being there. But anger is real. It's powerful. And I would say it's been the emotion that I have struggled with more than anything else.
Thank you, Heather. I think you speaking with such honesty about your experience is helpful for those of us who have maybe gone through a death of a loved one, and those of us who, will in the future, to keep these things in mind. I wanted to share another bit of feedback that came through with you. What an incredible story of love. Thank you so much for sharing your journey. What a wonderful way to honor him. And I want to echo that as well. I think hearing from you about what Aaron's journey looked like and how you and your family went through it, and the parts that were beautiful, the memories that you got to make in those final years, and the parts that were just extraordinarily difficult, and you bringing all of that with with you today and sharing it with us is so powerful. And I can't thank you enough for doing that and speaking to us this afternoon. Really, really moving. And we're so grateful for doing that and sharing that today. It is 4:16 now Eastern time, so we're going to wrap up for this afternoon. I did put the link in the chat there to Heather's blog about Erin, and if you go through there, it will link. It's a multiple part blog, so you can go and click through and find all the parts of Erin's story that Heather wrote and shared with us. And I also popped the link in for the session on Thursday if you're interested in joining us then. Our audience, thank you so much for joining and for all the lovely comments coming through for Heather. I'm going to pull the ones that I didn't share out loud and make sure Heather gets those. And again, Heather, we are so honored that you were with us today, and thank you again for everything. Okay, take care, everyone. Good afternoon. Bye-bye.